The biggest drug lab scandal in U.S. history took a major turn today as Suffolk County DA Rachel Rollins took steps to drop charges in tens of thousands of criminal cases that had evidence processed at the county's state lab. In a court filing today, Rollins announced the Hinton Lab Initiative, named for the lab where disgraced chemist Annie Ducan worked, before she was convicted for falsifying test results. Her actions have already led to more than 20,000 overturned cases, and in recent months, Rollins' office has begun investigating other potential misconduct at the lab. This comes just a couple of days after the DA took steps to throw out the final remnants of the case against Sean Ellis. Nearly 30 years after he was first arrested for a murder he has always maintained he did not commit, nearly 22 years of which he spent behind bars. For those few who don't know his case, which was chronicled in the Netflix docuseries Trial 4, investigators said Boston Police Detective John Mulligan was on detail and sleeping in his car in front of a Walgreens in Roslindale when he was shot 5 times in the face and killed following a robbery back in '93. Ellis, then 19 years old, was quickly arrested, tried for Mulligan's murder. The first 2 trials ended in hung juries, though one jury did convict Ellis of 2 counts of weapons possession. Then in a 3rd trial, he was convicted of murder and first-degree robbery and sentenced to life without parole. But later, 2 Boston police detectives pivotal to the case against Ellis, Walter Robinson and Kenneth Acera, pled guilty to corruption charges, and a 3rd corrupt cop got immunity in exchange for testifying against the others, casting doubt on witness testimony and physical evidence they'd found. In 2015, Sean's murder conviction was overturned. Ellis was released on bail, and a 4th trial was ordered. Then 3 years later, prosecutors dropped the murder and robbery charges, but today the weapons convictions still stand. So Ellis still is a convicted felon. Back in December, his attorneys filed for a new trial on those charges, and last week, Suffolk County District Attorney Rachel Rollins responded, asking the judge to grant the new trial so she can then drop the charges. Shortly after, she joined me here on Greater Boston.
Having gone through the long, hard process of looking at everything, it is really just a shameful chapter in our history as law enforcement. I have never seen this level of corruption.
Sean Ellis joins me now, along with his attorneys, Rosemary Scapicchio and Jillise McDonough. Congratulations to all 3 of you. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sean, what was your immediate reaction when you first heard news of Rollins' decision?
I was definitely happy, and that would be an understatement. But, you know, that happiness is quickly balanced out with the fact that, you know, there's still yet another step because we need to go in front of a judge and have a judge sign off on it. But it definitely brought something to me that finally somebody other than my defense team and those who support me acknowledge what happened in this case, and so, you know, that I'm elated about that.
Let's speak to your defense team. Rosemary, how long have you been on this case?
Over 20 years.
Over 20 years. Did you ever question along the way that this would be the ultimate outcome?
I always believed that I could prove Sean's innocence at some point. I didn't expect that the district attorney's office would join with me and support the motion for a new trial that we filed in this case. And I think it's a huge step forward that it's the first time in 28 years that the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office acknowledged that there was massive corruption in the Boston Police Department in the 90s, in the 2000s, and it needs to be addressed. And we're hopeful that now that this acknowledgement has been made and filed with the court, that there will be some institution that looks into any conviction that included Sarah Robinson, Brazel, Mulligan, or Detective Keeler, and anyone else who was involved in the wrongful conviction of Sean Ellis. We're hopeful that it will enlarge to looking at all of the convictions. The other officers that were in that unit had to have known what was going on and did nothing about it.
I want to get back to that possibility in a second. Jillise, Sean mentioned a minute ago that this, is not formally over. Obviously, it's before a judge. Is there any chance the judge in this case would not grant the motion in light of the fact there's this unusual circumstance where both sides are seeking the same thing?
I mean, I think it's hard to predict. It's completely within his purview to review everything. We think we've put forth a strong case that Sean should be relieved of this conviction at this point, because all of the corruption that infected his murder trial affected the gun conviction as well. And we think that District Attorney Rollins really put forth a strong statement in support of our motion for new trial.
You know, Sean, when you were first convicted and sentenced to life, which was 26 long years ago, did you think you'd die in jail?
That's what I was sentenced to, Jim. And that's something that I had to live every day of the time that I spent in prison, thinking about. And is part of what was driving me. I didn't want to resign to that fact, but it's what I was sentenced to.
How'd you wake up every day and go through the day knowing you might spend the rest of your life in a cage for something you didn't do? How did you get through every day for those 22 years?
I basically didn't have a choice. Is the only other choice was just to lay down and sit down, and I'll allow the railroading that happened to me to exist, or the other choice was to try to advocate for myself and get somebody that believed in me to help with that advocacy, and fortunate enough for myself, I got both Rosemary and Jillise to help from that perspective.
Boy, did you ever. Rosemary, I want to get back to what you said about the first time in decades that this district attorney's office has acknowledged something like this. In the motion for a new trial, among the things that D.A. Rollins said was there was egregious police corruption and prosecutorial misconduct. These were disgraceful chapters in our history. Despite saying that was not unanimous. As you know, in December of 2018, when the decision was made by the interim district attorney there not to proceed with a fourth murder trial, here's what the then Commissioner of Police, Willie Gross, had to say.
Sean Ellis is culpable. What does the evidence look like after 25 years? The witnesses and the strength. And the decision was based upon that, not innocence at all.
And then last week, Rosemary, the acting police commissioner, Gregory Long, said 3 detectives not only disgraced themselves, but unfortunately their conduct was used to tarnish the reputation of the entire department. The department does not and will not tolerate corruption. Recognizing the issues that surround this case, the department's belief remains the same, that there was sufficient credible evidence to support a conviction for illegal firearms possession. Despite what acting Commissioner Long said when he says they don't tolerate corruption, it appears they do tolerate corruption and defend it. Is that not what they're saying in this case?
That's exactly what they're saying. And in order to actually have some progress forward in this case, they have to acknowledge there was a problem. And what they did is sort of a backhand slap and say, yep, there were these 3 cops, they were rogues, and they had some problems, but nothing else is wrong with our department, and we stand behind a conviction that a Superior Court judge, 7 members of the SJC, and now a new district attorney have all looked at and said that Sean should not have been convicted, that he didn't get a fair trial, and that the evidence of corruption infected the entire trial. But as they continue, the problem with the Boston Police Department is every time they deny the existence of the corruption and deny that the corruption affects criminal cases in which they're involved, then they don't have to take any responsibility for that, because they can take a step back and say, we think he did it like Commissioner Gross did, or we still believe in the conviction. You can't still believe in the conviction if you understand that there's corruption that caused the conviction. You can't have it both ways. So you're either going to believe in the corruption or you're not. And they're wishy-washy on this, as they always are, so that they can avoid responsibility.
Jillise, correct me if I'm wrong. I think when we were discussing this, the 3 of us, 3 years ago or so when you were here, you said that it wasn't just the 3 cops who your colleague Rosemary just mentioned, but that all the way up the chain in the department, the leaders knew of what these men had done. Do I remember correctly what you told me?
Yes, that is what happened. A citizen had reported the corruption to the Internal Affairs Department and the Anti-Corruption Division within a month of Mulligan's death, and that went right up the chain of the command to the commissioner. So everyone was aware that Mulligan was murdered, obviously, and everyone was aware that this corruption occurred, but for some reason it never reached Sean and his defense team so that they could use that information.
Rosemary, if the decks are cleared and the judge does go along with this motion and then the convictions are thrown out, will there be a wrongful conviction proceeding on Sean's behalf from your office?
Well, I certainly encourage Sean to seek justice on the civil side as well, because you have to remember somebody took 22 years of his life, and it wasn't just somebody; it was the Boston Police Department. In their corruption, that they framed him and they put him in jail for 22 years for a crime he didn't commit. And so now, as hard as Sean is working out there to try to make a new life for himself, he's one step above an entry-level position. And he's not likely to make any significant money in the next 20 years because he lost the opportunity to work and build, his resume for the 22 years that they locked him in a cage.
Sean, I know you're tired of me asking the same question every single time you're here, but I hope you'll bear with me at least one more time. Why are you not angrier about this than you appear to be?
Well, once again, I refuse to live the remainder of my life being and walking around upset. And once again, let me clarify, if you will, my answer. Like I've had time to, be upset. When I was in prison, very early on and confused about, how I got there. There was a period in time that I was upset. But, having to deal with it, I had to deal with it while I was in prison, and so in my dealing with it, I learned that me being upset was a protective emotion, if you will, and the emotion that was protecting was my being hurt and my being sad and my being vulnerable, and so that's really the space that I'm in now, and not necessarily in a space where I'm walking around angry. I'm trying to heal in that kind of way from the inside out, and so.
But when you hear men like Commissioner Gross and Acting Commissioner Long, who refuse to accept the facts as laid out so powerfully by the district attorney, does that bother you, or is your bottom line, all I care about is moving on?
No. So I am human. Let me be very clear about that. Like, I am human. I do have feelings. I do have emotions, and I do not like when I hear those sorts of things. But I also understand that, when Commissioner Gross said what he said, and the current acting commissioner says what he says, there is a inability to distinguish between the corruption that happened in this case and the bad cops that were involved in investigating this case and the good cops. There is a difficulty to distinguishing between that, and so that isn't my burden, so to speak, to have to deal with that distinction. It's on me to try to do my best to not let it put me in a place where I'm reliving the trauma of being accused of something that I didn't do to begin with.
You're a very generous man, Sean Ellis, I'll tell you. We only have a minute, Rosemary, but you mentioned a minute ago, and I know I think at your first press conference after the DA made her decision, that you hope that she will look in all the cases that these 3 corrupt cops were involved in. She said to me last week she intended to reach out to defense counsel, to reach out to the public defender. Is that real? I'm not questioning her motives, but is that real decades after the fact?
I think it is. I think that there are still some people who could be serving life sentences like Sean was that might be affected by the fact that this is a path forward. It's a path forward for them to do a true investigation into what was going on in the Boston Police Department during this time period, not limited to the officers that were involved in Sean Ellis's case, but as Jillise said, all the way up to the commissioner. They allowed this conviction to stand for 22 years when they all knew the truth. The only ones who didn't know the truth were us. And we didn't find out the truth till 5 or 6 years ago.
Sean, last minute I have, what do you say to all of the other Sean Ellises out there who didn't do what they were accused and convicted of doing, maybe losing hope? What do you say to them?
Do your best to hold on to hope, and never give up on yourself. Despite who doesn't believe in you, despite how bleak things may look, never give up on yourself. Because as long as you're pushing forward and trying to clear your name, trying to prove your innocence, there's light at the end of the tunnel.
And by the way, I know you're also working to make sure that there is justice for many men and women who are in similar situations to yours. I congratulate you on that. And once again, all three of you, congratulations on decades of work. And Sean, I wish you huge luck in the days ahead. Sean Ellis, Rosemary Scapicchio, Jillise McDonough, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so
Jim,
much,
thank
Jim.
you.